Welcome back to another episode of the MBA Success podcast. Today I'm joined by Michelle Hughes.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, pleasure. Now, Michelle is the CMO and board member for McCarthy Jury Lawyers. She is a director at Atom Branding, and she recently graduated or completed the course for the Australian Institute of Directors and studied her MBA at QUT, and also recently completed her studies, yet has yet to graduate itself.
Yes. Very excited for the December graduation.
Yes, I can imagine. And in particular for this podcast, your sort of capstone project was a bit on trust, which is very prevalent in not only client-based services like lawyers and those sorts of things, but every part of life. So I'm sure it would be a fascinating conversation to dig into it, how it applies here specifically, and then more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Around that.
It's really become a hot topic recently, especially with data breaches, cybersecurity, and so on.
I can imagine. So starting with that, I'm curious to know how your research and what you've learnt and how that's impacted sort of your daily life and the behaviours and the way that you start thinking about things. Have you noticed a change in what you do and how you behave and act?
It's really interesting. So, and we'll go into this in more detail, I'm sure, but this trust research project started for me. I didn't realise it did at the time, but back in 2020. So it's been a long time that I have been really thinking about this. And I guess that actually stemmed from a background in customer data and understanding loyalty and retention. So that has been in my DNA. My first job in marketing was in that data space. It was during that transition when we were moving from above line advertising or TV and magazine and into more the digital space. So social media marketing was just in its infancy. Email marketing was starting out. Actually, social media came a little bit later, really. So for me, thinking about loyalty has been in the back of my mind always. Thinking about trust and how trust plays in that loyalty equation, that was a very new thing, and it certainly has been playing in my mind, considering what my relationships with different brands are, why I purchase where I do, why I select the dentist that I go to or the car that I buy. So it definitely has played into things.
Interesting. So going back there, looking at your LinkedIn history, you started in home loans.
Yes.
And then you went through to some maternity clothing.
Retail.
Products. Yeah.
Yep. Very early innovators in the e-commerce space.
Yeah, nice.
Yep.
And then you moved into more of a consultancy agency type business.
Agency.
Yeah, interesting.
Consulting work.
And it's always been in relation to a marketing type role.
It has, definitely, very much, which is interesting because when I was back in high school, my parents thought that I was going to go and be a doctor, so that didn't work out for them.
And so talk me through, back when you were starting your earlier career, how were you finding jobs? Like what were you looking for? Was there, were you particularly drawn to marketing or,
I always enjoyed that wordplay. That was probably the thing which drew me to marketing and understanding consumer behaviour and psychology and what makes people tick, why they make the decisions that they do. So that really was what drew me into that space. My first job was just as terrible as most people's first job of, tying balloons and putting letters into envelopes and everything. It wasn't very glamorous at all, but it really gave me a foundation for understanding the part that those really basic interactions have, whether it's welcoming a customer at the door or sending a communication piece. It all plays a part in building that relationship over time.
Yeah. And so moving through, did you seek them out? Did they land in your lap? Were they through, did you like to network and meet people?
I have always been a really good networker. So every career opportunity that I had actually came to me through my network. I haven't really gone down that traditional path of applying for jobs, which has been really fortunate for me. So after my time in the agency, I went out on my own and created my own consulting, which grew quite significantly very quickly. I was able to do that because I had continued to build that network. I've always had a great connection with people and ability to build rapport. And I think, again, really reflecting on it, it came back to the trust that I was able to build. And that comes down to doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it, and just building up that reputation for reliability.
Yeah. So talk me through, a lot of people go and do an MBA because they want to either get the skills to start their own business or, open up different career doors. But you'd already started a business by this point. So what was that like at that point in your career? Because I think that's a good 10, 15 odd years ago that you started.
Yeah. So I started that back 2009 was when I started the first business, and we've had several of them since that point. I guess there's no perfect time to do anything. People think that they need to go and get the education, or they need to have a certain amount saved up, or have this brilliant, perfect idea, but there's no such thing as a perfect idea or perfect timing. Yeah. And for us, I had gotten to the end of really that chapter, and there was no challenge there was no growth opportunity. And I turned to my husband and we had a conversation, and I said, I think that now would actually be a really great time to start a business, thinking that I would get more work-life balance and be able to spend more time with the kids. I was very wrong. But I did have a little bit more flexibility. I could drop them off and pick them up, and I had been working very long hours and weekends. So that it was nice to not be stuck in an office. Yeah. That was wonderful. I really think people who are thinking about starting a business, what they need to realise is that it's just about pivoting. You are going to come across adversity, and it is really just about your resilience and the ability to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and not hold on to whatever those losses or however you would describe it is, because that's where you learn. So every one of those little that didn't go how I hoped that it would, it's a learning opportunity, and that's your education. So by being a business owner, I in my opinion, it's the greatest education in business that you can get. Yeah.
And how was it particularly nervous time? Was it like, what are the emotions going through when you make that decision with your husband and you say, look, I'm going to forego the paycheck, the steady paycheck, and we'll sort of see what we can build, on our own. What's that feeling process like?
I was probably a little less risk adverse when I was younger. I thought that I could do anything. So maybe things would be a little bit different now. But at the time it was, well, let's just try this for 6 months. And my husband was working, so that was fantastic. It wasn't like we didn't have any income coming through. So I had that fortune. We were okay in terms of our finances. We had our home under control and everything like that. So it was probably the least risky time you can think of, and I also backed myself. I knew I had this great network. I had been doing business development for 4 years, so I started in the agency just managing accounts and got really bored with that. I loved going and finding new opportunities and creating them and seeking them out. And so I think that I had that confidence to go out there and just replicate what I'd been doing for the past few years within our own business.
Interesting. And talk there about, you obviously loved that idea of going out and finding the new opportunities. Would you say at that point you really knew what the things were that you liked and that you didn't like from a work perspective? Were you quite self-aware from that perspective?
I think early on I would work with anybody. So I didn't really have that same approach as what I do now over time. And I think in some ways when you're early on, when you're starting out, you do just have to work with everybody because that's how you learn what your tolerances are. Whereas now I am far more inclined to get to know that client and slow down the process of signing somebody up, making sure that we all understand each other a lot better, and I'm far more selective. I only work with clients that I really want to work with, so where I feel that I align with their business goals, their core values and so on. So that it took me a long time to really work that out and build up the ability to go, no, I'm going to walk away from this money, this contract, this opportunity.
And can you outline some of the experiences where you get to that point where you're like, oh, I actually shouldn't be working with everybody?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Sometimes I had one that happened last year, and I did work with them. We had a 6-month contract in place, and it was over that period of time where I started to see these little things, red flags, let's call them, cropping up, where I was like, I don't really agree with that. That's not the way that I would go about it. It's not my business.
Yep.
So I can't control everything. I'm consulting and providing advice. And then they offered to extend, and it was quite a generous offer to extend. And at that point, so I had been looking forward to it coming to an end. So I think that that's a pretty good inclination. But yeah, it was definitely something which I had to learn over time, because I had terrible clients who I kept for 4 years. Yeah. And I look back on that and I go, why did I do that at the time? But I was sitting there thinking about, the employees and the wages and the overheads and so on, and how will I cover all of this if we don't have that revenue coming in? Whereas now my approach is, well, it's okay, we'll just go out and find more. We'll find out somebody else who is more on par with our...
More suitable for our particular operation style. Yeah, interesting. And so was this concept of trust something that you were thinking back then specifically, or it was just something that was, again, natural-ish to you? Yeah,
it was something which came naturally to me. I certainly was not self-aware of that at the time. I knew that I built good rapport, and I knew that I built relationships with people, and that they would call me when there was something difficult, because they had a level of trust in me. But I didn't realise consciously that I was building trust with them. It was just something which I knew I could get the impossible done if it was an awful timeline or something like that. And that was really stressful. But it was like for them that once I came in and I said, we can do this, their stress was eased. It was now my stress to take on. But it was really great groundwork for me. It taught me a lot.
Can you provide an example? I'm assuming most of these were sort of in that marketing space. So somebody's coming to you with a problem in their business, and they're saying, Michelle, I need you to solve this. And you're going, okay, here's all my ideas, and let's make it happen.
So one which was a standout in my mind, and it sounds like not a lot on the surface, but there was a lot of complexity involved. I was working with Allegis, which is a recruitment agency, and they were having their international conference over in Bali, and needed all of the coordinating merchandise and everything to arrive over there on time. Like, that's not really my thing, but that's okay. We can have a look at that. Looked at the timelines and went, oh, that's very tight, because you've got international quarantines and so on to work with, large volumes, really strict branding guidelines, very complicated logo reproductions, which are involved in that side of things. So on top of the logistics and a tight time frame, and the conference starts on a certain day, you can't be late. There is no movement of that date. There was the other complexity around it. So, having to meet a certain minimum standard, which requires sampling and so on. International suppliers, so getting things from overseas to get approved and signed off by different directors and everything. So it was a really complicated process. And when they called up and said, this is what we're thinking of doing, went away, looked at it, put together the Gantt chart and said, this is how we will tackle it. Do you agree with this? And they were like, yeah, fantastic. This is great. After that, their urgency dropped off. It was suddenly mine. I was the one who was like, you need to sign this off. If we don't get this done, you are not going to have your stock. You are not going to be ready on day one. And they're like, oh, no, it's okay. No. It's not okay. but
there you go.
It all fell into place. It all worked out really well. Yeah. They were incredibly happy. I had a few more grey hairs after the experience, but I came away a little bit wiser.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, I think it's some things that I've talked about on this podcast and others, is the concept of, moving into the unknown versus, being in order, right? And those sorts of problems are around making order out of the chaos. You find yourself in a new place. Like if somebody blindfolded you, put you in the middle of nowhere and said, work out how to get back, you're in chaos, right? It's like, I've never been here. Whereas if they put you somewhere where you knew, all of a sudden it's not particularly scary because you're like, I've been here and I've traversed this path before. I think applying that lens to business problems or any of those problems, even personal problems, where you kind of go, all right, what's the landscape that I'm in right now? Is it familiar or is it unfamiliar? And if it's unfamiliar, you go, okay, what do I need to know in order to move in the right direction? Rather than getting all worried and flustered and going, this is going to be the worst thing ever. It's just, okay, take stock of where you are. What do you need to do? And move,
100%.
Move in the right direction.
It's that tolerance of ambiguity, and which is a concept I first learned about from one of my courses at QUT. Peter O'Connor authored the paper on that, and Dr. Peter O'Connor, and it was a really interesting thing to understand how different people have a different tolerance of ambiguity, and through that process I discovered I have quite a high tolerance, but that's because of how I approach ambiguity. Like, I don't know where I'm going, but I will create a framework really quickly. Like I said in that example, the first thing I did, I'm like, oh, how on earth do you do that? This is how. So I put together a really clear plan, made it clear to all of the parties involved. Okay, well, if we can do this, then we can navigate our way to the goal location. And I think for me, personal or business, it's something which you can do. If you have a plan and structure, you can't be fixed with it because things happen. You need to be agile and move and adjust and adapt. But if you generally have a plan and know what those steps are moving forward, at least the next 2 steps in front of you, it helps to ease that stress around the ambiguity.
Yeah. And do you think that's something that you learnt when you were growing up, perhaps? Is that something that was presented in a number of things? Can you remember an experience that particularly stood out that might have helped grow that, or you just think it's an innate trait? That's
a really interesting question. Most things come from your childhood, don't they? There's something which comes up. Going through the MBA and the leadership subjects in particular, I realised how much culture has played a difference. My parents are both from overseas, and I think that tolerance of ambiguity, if I really think about it, which I've never done before, comes from there, picking up and moving to a new country and not knowing anybody and just saying, okay, that's all right. As long as we know where we're landing, that's fine, and where we're going to live. And once we get there, we'll work out the next couple of steps. And I remember going on holidays with my parents, and Dad wouldn't book any accommodation. We'd just get there and he'd sort it out a couple of days ahead. I'm not that good. When I travel overseas, I like to know where I'm sleeping every night. I can wing the rest of it, but and that probably comes from driving around in circles trying to find a hotel that had accommodation. I realised that too much ambiguity is not a good thing.
Was he cool with that?
Yeah, he was fine with it. Mum was not.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also like to think that I've got a fair amount of tolerance for ambiguity as well, and I can't particularly put it down to any experiences like that where my parents were just like, oh yeah, we'll just get there and we'll figure it out.
I think when you come to a country with a suitcase, that really gives you a whole lot of perspective.
How old were you when that happened?
Oh, so my dad came over to the country, but I would have been 7 or 8 when we were, in a foreign country, English speaking, so that was okay. Yeah. It was only New Zealand.
But still big for a 7-year-old.
Driving around, and my brother, he was cool as long as there was food. Yeah. So he didn't mind too much.
That's awesome. Yeah, when one of the episodes a few back, talking to Lisa Kazalek, I put not a lot of it, but I put some of it down to sport and being able to interact with lots of different people. Saying that I played team sport from when I was, 4 or 5 years old, all the way through to the end of high school. Through that was swimming was a big part of being able to interact with lots of people. So, when you've spent, a decade plus learning how to work with other people, I think people are probably some of the most ambiguous people that you can deal with, the most ambiguous things. So
100%. Yeah. I didn't do team sports when I was growing up, and I often wonder if that's why I went out and started business on my own. And I think it's a large part of why I came back and wanted to take on this role here, because I thought, am I actually unemployable? Can I not play well with other people? Because I had this great success in my own entities. And I was getting frustrated constantly when I was working for other people. And I think that was partly a maturity thing. I've loved being in this environment and being a part of a team. And I do have the fortune of still sticking my fingers into the businesses.
Yes.
Outside of MDL hours.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, with that, why a lawyer company? Why work for a company that does soliciting? And
I suppose that probably feels a little out of field because our clients in our consulting were, Porsche and a lot of the luxury automotive space, and it was very glamorous and fun. The opportunity came through network. So somebody who my husband had employed many, many years ago was a partner, and they were looking to create a department. And so that the conversation went on, do you think Michelle would be interested? And I said, let's have a chat and go from there. And just that, I love professional services because working in a marketing and business consulting professional services space, I just think there's so much correlation. So whether your flavour is accounting, medical specialist, engineering, law, there are a lot of similarities. That client relationship and client journey is quite similar. So seeing this large-scale operation and this greenfield opportunity to create something, it was too good to turn away from. And the people were all wonderful. So I was really eager to jump in, and it's been a great decision. Yeah.
And when you started turning your thoughts to, okay, how do we, go to marketing, in the, professional services, client services and those sorts of things, is there something in particular that you're looking for that you need to highlight as a priority for, one, I guess, building awareness, and two, making it so that people want to walk in the doors when they actually have the need for one?
Yeah, I think there are a few things which go into it. What keeps people coming back is good communication and setting realistic expectations in the first place and then delivering on those expectations. But getting somebody in the door in the first place, it's about building that credibility out of context. So it's having good social and digital campaigns, it's having a good website presence and giving a flavour of your personality and the team member personality. So that culture, because every firm, every practice is a little bit different, and clients generally want to work with people who are like them or like their business. It's a business that you're talking about rather than personal legal services. So trying to articulate that as much as possible and not just being a sterile brand is so important.
Yeah, finding that balance I'm sure is a bit tricky because, trust is an interesting one, and we'll get onto that and let you sort of talk about what you found and, what the report was. But trust in an industry obviously has multiple levels, right? So there's the trust at the lawyer level in general. So like, what do people in general in Australia think about lawyers, right? That's one. Do they trust them? Do they not? Like, do they trust politicians? And then, well, I guess the level below that, you've got, well, do you trust MDL as a business? And for the most part, unless you've had experience with them, it's probably hard. So you just revert back to, well, what do I think about the overall industry? And then you get the layer below that, which are the individuals in that, and do I trust the lawyer that I'm working with particularly? So have you been working at that sort of multi-level thought process around how to...
So if you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, lawyers sit in that tier of trusted professionals, but at the bottom of the trust. So your educators, they are at the top at the moment, but they do sit above the line and they fall into the trusted category. If you talk to people one-on-one, then you will probably hear pretty quickly that the blood-sucking vampire jokes and everything, because that's what everybody always says to me. First of all, they're like, "Oh, you work for lawyers? Are you a lawyer?" I'm like, no. And then they go on on their rant. So that's an interesting hurdle to overcome before somebody even gets in the door. And then you are quite right. There are layers of trust. So you have, I trust you to get the job done. And then there is extreme trust, which is where you trust somebody, your professional, more than you trust yourself. So if you were getting heart surgery, you just do exactly what the surgeon says. Okay, cool, I'll do exactly what you say because you know way more than me. And we have so many clients like that. And those kind of trusted relationships are built over time. So it is that proven reliability over a coefficient of time. And the longer you have proven yourself to be a reliable, trusted advisor, the stronger that trust is. So those clients will pick up the phone before they sign a contract, when an idea is just forming in the back of their heads, and get that feedback before they even start moving.
Yeah, interesting. Well, do you want to talk about your report, what you found? We can dive a little bit more into that.
So I will try and get this as concise as possible. But as I alluded to earlier, it started in 2020. Prior to then, we'd done regular NPS surveys, just like everybody does, to gauge how you're going and everything. But come September 2020, when after COVID, when things started going back to normal and we were back to face-to-face, the CEO and I sat down and had a conversation and said, I wonder how we went during that period, because we couldn't provide our regular level of service. We didn't have face-to-face contact. We were doing VOIs, which are verification of identity, through car window signings. So it was incredibly removed from that personal service, which MDL had built the reputation on. And so sent the survey out and got wonderful feedback. The firm did exceptionally well. And I think to a large extent we were all in the same boat. It wasn't like we suddenly went to this remote situation and all of the other firms were still delivering face-to-face. So results were really great. There were a few pieces of feedback that came through, which when I looked at her, I was like, oh, I wish I knew who that person was. I would love to pick up the phone and just talk through that and fix their problem for them. I would love to go back and train that employee on that process, because they clearly missed a step there. But I didn't have all of that data and the time was too far gone. So from there, the idea came about to send a monthly feedback loop. So at the point when an invoice is sent out, a client is automatically sent a survey link, and we get that feedback in almost real time at that point, where they're the most likely to be upset because they've just gotten a bill on their desk. And through that process, so that started running February 2021, took a few months to get that whole system built up and the platform for the reporting and everything. It was eye-opening immediately. So for the most part, you get really great feedback, and that's lovely to hear how well people are doing. But every so often, probably I would say 7 to 10% of the time, you get some feedback where the process broke down. So we have been able to go back and do process improvements, retraining of staff members, reworking of workflows even, and that has been exceptional. Fast forward to the beginning of this year, I have an integrated work project to work on, and I've been mulling around in the back of my mind, what on earth do I do here? And it hadn't sat well with me that I've been collecting all of this data from our client survey, and then all I'm doing with it is troubleshooting, resolving issues. So well, what can we do that's more valuable than this? And I went and had a conversation with Professor Michael Roseman at QUT and Dr. Catherine Batch, and they were just brilliant in helping me construct this concept. I'd come across Michael in a subject business process design, and I just loved the way that he explained and broke processes down. It really resonated with me, and I was using a lot of those frameworks that I had learnt in my day-to-day work. So it made sense to bring him into that process. And where I ended up going, because they just asked me lots of questions, and I was like, now I'm more confused than I was before. But I ended up coming up with this hypothesis to discover what were the critical trust points. So where is trust made or broken in a customer journey, and what can be done really early on in the first 2 hours with a new client to set yourself up for success.
Awesome. And you found things like emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I found emotional intelligence and self-awareness was really important for those who knew what they were doing. But what was brilliant about the outcome or the output of the research is that you can actually framework it just by creating a checklist and making sure that your employees are doing certain things at certain points in time. You can teach them so that it becomes second nature, because somebody who's been practicing for 20 years, of course they have the EQ and IQ to work this out, but when you have a graduate lawyer, how do you replicate that same experience, because you want to have that firm wide.
And the going back to that sort of ambiguity type of conversation, I mean, I guess in these sorts of situations the clients are coming to you with a problem, right? And it's obviously something they can't figure out themselves. So they're looking into that path down the road and going, we don't know how this is going to play out. We don't know all these different variables and what they're going to do. So that obviously plays a part into the point where you're talking about creating that clear, communicated narrative of what are the options, what are the way things can happen. So I guess from that communication element, what were the elements of that stood out? So
what became evident really quickly, and I did a series of interviews. So off the back of the data which I had, I categorised lawyers to trusted and less trusted, and then I found a selection of clients who worked with each of those lawyer types. And really quickly, it became evident that it was that setting of expectations. So the client is in a really ambiguous state. There's a lot of uncertainty. They don't know which way is up. And that fluctuates. For somebody who is buying a house and it's a conveyance, that's not quite the same as if you are in a child custody battle or a litigation and you might be losing your business and house and everything. So there's a scale there, but for everybody, they are coming in with a level of uncertainty, and what they are hoping for is that that lawyer will make it okay and tell them everything's going to be fine. So the solicitors who are able to understand really quickly, empathise with the client, and provide in a timely manner, look, these are the options. And for some people, there's no good options because it's an awful situation. That's why you're coming to a lawyer. It's not because, I feel like going to a lawyer today. But for them, when they don't actually know what that worst case scenario is, being able to say, okay, so that's as bad as it could get, and this is potentially as good as it could get. Let's work towards that, but be mentally prepared for the worst. And to know what that financial commitment is and the timelines as well. All of that really helps the client just to breathe that sigh of relief and go, we'll get through this. I don't know what it'll be, but there's another side.
And in terms of keeping them informed, was that a part of how they felt at the end of it?
So the communication throughout is very important, but for every type of matter, and I think this applies to any professional service, you have milestones and critical points. So your clients generally don't expect the communication and warm and fuzzies throughout that process, but then when there is a critical point, so say it's a finance date which is due or documents that are arriving, they expect and they want that communication in a really timely manner. And if it is running half an hour late, then you had better advise them, it's okay, I'm on this. It's a little bit behind. We expect it now by 4 p.m. this afternoon, not midday.
So is there a difference between like trust and confidence, being confident that they can do the job versus trusting it?
Confidence is a part of your trust equation. So confidence is probably what gets the client in the door in the first place. So if I'm Googling and I need to get something done, whatever it happens to be, I will go to the website, I will look at everything that I can see, testimonials and so on, and then I will have a level of confidence that that lawyer or professional service person can deliver on my project. Trust is a layer further than that. So trust comes when you have proven that that confidence was rightly given.
Interesting. And so the people who had that sort of lower levels of emotional intelligence and obviously couldn't quite pick up the cues that they were being given by the clients and those sorts of things, saying given this framework, they were able to increase their sort of trust ratings quite significantly.
So it's being built into our processes, and obviously it's a slow process, but where we have started to build that in, we are seeing And the way that you see it reflected in our law firm is in the reduction in disputed bills.
Okay.
So when a client is happy with the service and they felt like they've been kept informed, they are less likely to dispute their bill. They understand exactly why they're being billed, what it was for, and so on. It really came down to the fact that, and this is what the client said in the interviews, they cared more about how they felt through the process than what the invoice was at the end. Like if you took that stress away from them, and if we go back to that situation for me as a consultant, where I had that client and they had this awful project over in Bali and needed everything delivered by a certain deadline, the second that I said, it's okay, I got this is the plan, this is how we're going to do it, they were like, great, fine, everything's all good. And it was all delivered and they were all happy because that expectation was set up front.
So by providing a customer with a stressful experience that then leads to resistance against their invoices based on the perceived fact that, I wonder if it's because the value that they see has been eroded in the services that were provided. It's like, you didn't do a good enough job at making me not stress that I wasn't sure whether that was something that you were doing or that you should have spent that long doing or whatever it was.
And I think that it's realising, so some lawyers, the lawyers who came out as trusted in the surveys, they understood that they weren't there just to deliver a legal service. They were there to take care of that customer and their emotional well-being throughout that process. So they saw that as their duty, not writing up a contract. That's just the task. So they, and this comes to the conscious competence side of things. So back when I was consulting, I was unconsciously competent. I didn't realise what it was that I was doing that was making me successful. It's only now that I reflect 10 years later and I've done this research project and all of these interviews and data analysis that I can say that.
Yeah. And it reminds me, going through the MBA and all the leadership stuff, and when you work with good leaders and you see how they operate, you can know everything you need to do as a leader. Like you can go to an MBA, you can learn, you can do a leadership course, whatever it is. But if you don't actually care about your people, then what's your motivation to actually impart the knowledge that you've got and actually do the job? I guess if there's KPIs and those sorts of things, but it's that same concept. So if the lawyer truly believes that their job is not just to make sure a contract's done and get the result that's wanted, but it's actually to take care of the people as people, then naturally you'll get the right result.
And even more than just caring about them, it's articulating that you care to them. So it's actually quite involved. And, you know, as the client, you go, I'm just hiring you to write my employment contracts for me. And you don't think about how much more there is that goes into that process. Which is, I just did a piece of an assignment on introverted leadership, and that is specifically one of the areas that can negatively affect their performance is their passive, stoicness around. Yes, they might actually be good at registering the fact that somebody needs some help, but they don't articulate the help that's going to come, or even articulate, hey, I can see that this is upsetting you, or that this is frustrating you, let me work with you. Instead, it's internalized, not externalized, and therefore, though they're perceiving everything the right way, the other person's not. So it's not a two-way stream, and I think it's a similar thing here. 100%. And then I think that you've got the other extreme as well, where you have your extroverted, charismatic leader who can come across as inauthentic. You're like, well, do you really mean what you're saying, or is this just lip service? So it's striking that balance in the middle, and to me it comes down to that education and the conscious competence. If you understand what it is that you're trying to do and you are actively reading those social cues and going, oh, look, Ross doesn't seem like he's really understanding what I'm talking about. I don't want him to walk away feeling uncertain. Then that's that first step in changing. And this is where, your people in their early career, they can't possibly know how to do that. They're just trying to work out the processes.
Yeah.
And then as you get further down your career, if you haven't built those habits, then you're just going to continue doing things the way that you always have.
Yeah. And I think that's why, everything's on an interesting trajectory now, as we were talking about before we started recording. Office space, people spending more time at home, more time watching people on screens as opposed to in person, and gaining those skills which for probably the last hundreds of years have been really important to helping people navigate interpersonal relationships. And what's that going to be like? You hear all the time of the things around Japan, like the children in Japan spend so much more time just texting each other, even if they're in the same room rather than interacting in person. And I think that's probably on one end of the spectrum, and you definitely see other parts where children I love seeing kids these days running around the street together, because you hardly ever see it. And you're like, that was my childhood, just running around, with your friends and, doing things that you probably shouldn't have been doing. But I see that now and I'm like, that's excellent, because it's a bit of a rare sight. But I do wonder where, how people will get those skills, and if those skills will be as valuable as they were once needed to be.
It's an interesting situation. I'm a big fan of the hybrid working model. I think that there's a lot of value with the modern family to have that flexibility, but I also see so much value in building those relationships and cultivating a corporate culture from having the contact hours as well. So whether that's just a day a week where your team are all together, or the whole business are all together, or something like that, depends on the size and scale of your business, really. I see that as incredibly valuable. And to your point, I think that we will lose some of that skills development. It's, like stained glass windows. It's a dying art because people don't do it anymore. There's no one to hand that tradition over to. The ability to communicate and empathise and articulate thoughts and feelings and so on, or maybe it'll just increase and we'll have to get better at it because we have to take those social cues online. I don't know if you ever had that back in the early days and trying to build rapport with somebody through a video. I was like, I feel like my limbs are cut off. How do I actually do this? And then I had to work really hard to try to develop new skills, and now it's second nature. You jump online, you can, and you go on with that. So I don't know, I've just flipped from one to the other.
Correct.
But
and that's the thing. I think if you're good at in person, you'll be absolutely fine doing it on a video, right? But I went and started studying the business psychology stuff because I think people are the most important part of everything. That nothing happens without people, and nothing will ever continue to happen without people, even as AI takes over, because it's all still built for us. So it should be, assuming that Skynet doesn't take over. But that to me is, if without people, there's like no point to anything. So like trying to understand how we behave, why we behave, and do those sorts of things, to me seems like the most important part. And if you're diluting your interactions with people, then you're diluting the amount of experience that you can have in getting better at what you need to in order to just be an effective human being in the world. And that was some of the interesting parts that I found out when I was looking at that introverted leadership side of things is, we know that for historically, extroverted leaders have been the ones that get, the praise and all that sort of stuff. They're generally the loudest people in the room, but they are also the worst listeners. And therefore, it's been good to see that, introverted leaders are gathering momentum, and that we do start to value them far more than we have historically. But it's also a case for both of those having the self-awareness to know their weaknesses in context of where they're working and how they're working, is to minimize those.
And if you think of it from that perspective, having this digital technology has helped those introverted leaders, I think, to be able to express themselves and articulate those thoughts, because introverts traditionally are more well considered. They're listening and observing the world around them and thinking and processing rather than just running off at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And both leadership styles are wonderful. It's a matter of, really understanding self and working on those weaknesses. But I think that has been a really great thing. We've seen some wonderful introverted leaders who have risen up and done an exceptional job over the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with trust, you alluded to you've right at the start, it's helped you think about some of the things. Why do I like this brand? Why do I like that brand? From a personal perspective, your relationships with family or friends, has it sort of played into that?
Gosh, you know what this is like. Once you start pulling the layers of the onion back, you start analysing every part of your life and what the communication style from different people are, why you like catching up with some friends over other friends, whether it's social or business related. And, it has helped me with that choosing who I work with because we talk so much about gut feel, and gut feel is really important. But then being able to analyse that and break it down and go, that's why I feel that way. That's why I have that instinct there. And I find that gives you the confidence to make the decision and go, yes, we're going to go ahead with that, or no, I'm not feeling good about that for these reasons, and I'm happy to walk away.
Yeah, I'm smiling so much because that's exactly what I do. It's like, you start to go down this rabbit hole of trying to understand how people work and all that sort of stuff. And okay, now I can understand how I work and why I like things and why I don't like things. And I think my wife gets a bit sick of it every now and then when I literally break down every interaction that I have with other people or her. And I'm like, so this is why I was feeling this way. And I very much understand that. Yeah. And I think that my husband and I do that a bit as well. We break things down an awful lot, and I think that you learn from it and you get better. Absolutely. And I think within that, the going back a little bit as well is that self-awareness piece. None of this actually works with that example of, this was my gut feeling, if you're not aware of it to later be able to recall and go I actually had this feeling about that particular person and it wasn't a good one. Can I have a think about that and understand what that was? Yeah. If you're just going through the motions and you're just reactive the whole time, then it doesn't help. The other thing that I love about trust, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on this, is how it, sits at a society's level. Because we are in a city with 2 million people, and for the most part, you can live here without bad things happening to you. You got to keep your eyes open to make sure you know what you're doing. But the level of trust that just lives in a city, I find staggering. The fact that you can walk down a street and you're safe. In Brisbane, Australia, I know that's not quite the case in a lot of other places, but is that something that, has crossed your path or thought about or anything like that?
I think for the most part, people don't realise how much they're trusting the environment around them for them to just be able to function. It's interesting when you bring AI into the conversation, and now that it's something that people are consciously thinking about, I don't want to use ChatGPT because I don't want to tell them everything. I'm like, yeah, but you've been happy to use your navigation for the last 10 years, which is an AI model.
Yeah.
It's once people start thinking about it and realising how much trust they're putting into technology, environment, and just other factors around them, I think that's when they start to question and so on. So honestly, I don't think people are really putting that much thought into it, because when you do, you go, oh, geez, I'm not riding an e-scooter to work now.
Yeah. It's a good point. But I mean, again, we're sitting in a building. I don't know the first thing about engineering, and I just trust that they've done the right job to do it, right? And I trust that the electricians know how to keep the lights on and all those sorts of things. And I think it's just such an unappreciated fact that we live in societies, and that, the food that we eat is healthy and all those,
I really think that it is with the cybersecurity breaches recently and AI and digital technology really starting to explode in the last 12, 24 months, that trust is becoming an agenda item. If you search it now, there are so many articles and projects and PhDs on trust, whereas in the past that was just not a thing. It wasn't a word that really came up in a business context anyway.
Yeah. I did a bit of research, and I think one of the articles, the journal articles that I was reading, was from like 1990, and it seemed like one of the not I wouldn't say it was one of the earlier ones, but it's not like it had like a billion papers to cite from.
No.
I guess staying on that AI trust thing, being on the board for a law firm, you know, the ChatGPT has definitely been talked about in the vein of, you know, contracts, all those bits and pieces. So I assume that's an agenda item for you guys to consider as to the disruption it may cause.
So we're working at the moment on a far more rigid process than using ChatGPT. So that's just not a feasible option because we all know about the hallucinations that AI language models have that'll just make stuff up.
Correct.
You cannot trust or rely on that. However, if you are building your own closed circuit of AI, which is pulling from your own, AI is an algorithm.
Yep.
You program information in and it draws the information which you require. And then it relies on the person who is driving that tool to make it run effectively. So 100%, that is something that we are working on now. It is going on in the back end. It's a part of remaining competitive, providing quality service and the best quality service because the accuracy of a machine is higher than that of a human. So it improves that quality assurance side of things as well. But only if you're doing it within your own closed circuit system. You can't go out and ask ChatGPT to start doing your work for you. That's not good business practice.
No, not at all. And so I guess this will be a really helpful, I guess, process for you to have gone through as that gets closer, because you'll have, I guess, trust in the forefront of your mind as to like, what are my customers, our potential clients looking for in order to feel safe and, you know, in good hands with this type of technology, right? Because it's already ambiguous coming to see a law firm. It's even more ambiguous to then add AI onto that whole thing. So
I think the important thing is that you're still maintaining that contact with your lawyer. So you still have that key point of contact and that person is providing the updates. And the fact remains the same. Those critical points where that communication and contact with the client is required, they don't change. So as long as we're maintaining that and the quality of service provision in between those steps is the same or higher, which is what we're anticipating, then it actually really improves that client experience. It should make it a little bit more efficient and so on. And just like our navigation models, it's that efficiency which is a key driver for the consumer.
Yeah. And you think of the navigation system, which has just provided a path, and then you add on all these autonomous driving cars that are the next
let's
layer
let's not unpack that one today.
Yeah, that's another kettle of fish. Look, been a fantastic conversation. I've taken up plenty of your time. The last question I'll ask is in the name of the podcast, but success. Like, what is success to you?
I think success is realizing that there's always growth ahead. I think, you know, for me, starting the MBA journey, I thought that I would come away with a few frameworks and tools and I'd know some cool stuff at the end of it, but it completely reshaped the way that I approach business, conversations, relationships, and so on. And it really reminded me and reinvigorated my love of learning. And so, success for me is continual learning and always striving to be the best version of myself.
Excellent. Well put. Awesome. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to come and talk.
Loved it. Thank you.
It was only an hour and I probably still have 50 questions I could ask. So another time, but yeah, appreciate it. Now, do you want people to reach out to you on LinkedIn or anything like that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
Connect on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, I'll put your thing in the show notes or something like that. And yeah, for everyone else listening, thank you for sticking around and see you next time.
Thanks, Ross.